Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and our guest today is Mike Ulmer. He's joining us from Hamilton, Ontario, up in the Great White North of Canada. He specializes in helping business people write their books, and he's written 13 books with a total of nearly $1 million in total sales revenue. His latest book from March 2022 is Show and Tell Writing, a great short business book about how to write a great short business book. His other recent titles include Drop the Mic Marketing with Jason Hunt, The 50-Year-Old Millennial, The Leadership Gap Exposed by Millennials and How to Close It with Marc Petitpas, and The 40 Ways of the Fox with Ron Foxcroft. Mike worked as the in-house storyteller for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Raptors, and TFC as the senior writer. That's the football club, Toronto Football Club. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, well, football, soccer here, yes.
Yes, right. He was senior writer at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and he'd previously written for the Toronto Star, the National Post, and other news organizations across Canada. So, Mike, welcome to the podcast. How are you this morning?
Oh, thanks, Mark. Thank you for having me. I'm great.
There's an interesting fact about Mike. He wrote a children's book, M is for Maple. It's the best-selling alphabet book in Canadian publishing history. So was it a mistake to not write more alphabet books, or do you get tapped out at some point?
No, my mistake wasn't saying no the first 3 times to it. The publisher it took a Michigan publisher to write an alphabet book that was specifically about Canada. And they said, Mike, we want you to write this book. And I said, nah. And they said, no, really, you should. We really think it would be a hit. And I said, nah. Well, why don't you come down to Chelsea, Michigan, and we'll talk about it. And they gave me lunch, and that was the thing. If you feed me, I'm way more amenable. So I did the book, and I've talked to thousands and thousands of kids about the book, about writing, about Canada. It was the smartest thing I ever did, but I had to be dragged kicking and screaming to it.
Was there debate, M is for Mountie versus M is for Maple?
The only thing that they asked for was Anne of Green Gables. She said, I'm from PEI, so I need Anne of Green Gables. So, and it has poetry. So A is for Anne. That's Anne with an E, a redheaded girl who loved Avonlea. The Cuthberts thought they were getting a boy, but that redheaded girl was their pride and their joy. And so I wrote that poem first because it was for Anne. But no, not M is for Mountie. M is for, oh my goodness, I think Maurice Richard, if memory serves.
Ah, right. Hockey player.
Yes, a fantastic hockey player for the Montreal Canadiens.
Yes, that's right. Well, Mike and I, we had a really nice chat before we started recording, reminiscing about sports. I grew up around Detroit. Mike is in the close enough to Toronto, and we had a lot of reminiscing there. But
I'm from Sarnia, so we would go across the creek all the time. Cobo Hall, you name it. Saw Bruce Springsteen at Cobo Hall.
Oh wow! Right across the river from, or just up the river and across from Detroit.
Our way.
Mike's website, if you want to learn more about his books and the services he provides to authors, it's getcatapulted.com. And I think we'll come back and talk more about that, questions about writing and publishing. But as we always do here, Mike, we kind of jump into the core question at hand. Thinking back to your career and the different things you've done, what is your favorite mistake?
Well, boy, it's sort of hard, Mark, to find just one. But my biggest mistake was getting arrested. I was in a confrontation on an airplane where I slapped a coworker. Now people look at me and go, "You're the guy that I would reach for in the fight." If everyone sort of doubles up in a big hockey fight, and so you look for the guy that's going to do the least damage, they would be lining up to grab me because I'm so non-physical. But that was the mistake I made, and I changed the arc of my career completely. And I had always wanted to be a big-time sports writer, and I'd made that. But what I didn't know was that I had bipolar illness. And so at that moment where I had reached kind of the height of it was the moment that I kind of brought it all down. And there was that great line from Denzel Washington to Will Smith after he slapped Chris Rock. And he said, at the moment of your greatest height, that's when the devil comes for you. And that line resonated so much with me because I was absolutely at the apex of a career that I've been building for 25 years. And that moment I just blew it up. But the corollary to that is that was the moment that I realized I needed help. And since that time, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, I've lived a much better life because of medication and meditation and all these things. I needed that terrible event to sort of
Wow.
send me the right way. So that was my biggest mistake.
Wow. And a biggest mistake versus a favorite mistake. I mean, here on the podcast, a favorite mistake is something we learn from or opens doors in sometimes an unexpected way. I mean, sometimes a favorite mistake can be a biggest mistake. It's not always true in both directions.
That's a great distinction.
But I mean, I appreciate your reflection on, framing it as something that led to getting help and led to a better path. If you don't mind me asking, like what led to the slap? I mean, what was the altercation about?
My madness basically led to the slap. Because it was just a work quarrel with somebody else that I elevated way past common sense. And it was because I had this feeling of grandiosity and entitlement that I thought I could just reach across someone in an airplane, no less, and give them a cuff. And it was just an ordinary work thing. And people say to me, I'll describe it, and they'll say, well, you were entitled to do that. He was a bad guy or whatever. Well, he wasn't a bad guy in particular, first. And second, there is no entitlement that allows you to lay your hands on another human being.
Sure.
There isn't. There just isn't. There's nothing that guy could say or do that would warrant me slapping him, especially in a work context. So it was just a beef about work and nothing personal past that.
I mean, not that it justified what Will Smith did, but while we're talking about slaps, it's not like the guy told a joke about your wife or insulted you or something. It was just
it was just a clash of egos, except for mine was running out of control because I wasn't right. I wasn't well. And so the result of it was like I got arrested. I had to go to court. I spent $5,000 on a lawyer. I never traveled again. I was going to Super Bowls and the Olympics. I never traveled again because, and quite justifiably, the company wouldn't be sure that something terrible wouldn't happen. And I did the same thing. I would have done the same thing they did. That meant that the best part of the job for me, traveling and go to all these places and writing these great events, was gone. And so my tenure at the paper for the rest of the time wasn't as satisfying. And even as I got better, it was just never the same. So the rest of my career worked out great. I ended up going to Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. They were wonderful, and now I help people with their writing, and I love that. But it was, in fact, my favorite mistake. But it was a cataclysmic mistake.
I mean, it sounds like this is me guessing here, or not. I mean, but it's interesting that you frame it in terms of that episode, that incident led to you getting help. It may, I don't know if that, have you ever thought or reflected like, well, if that hadn't happened, something else might have happened that would have been more derailing? I mean, that's a hypothetical, I realize.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, it's funny, a lot of times when people have bipolar illness, it manifests itself in ways like infidelity, gambling, rash spending and stuff like that. None of that stuff was really big for me. But I think you're dead on. If it hadn't come there, it would have come in another way that was perhaps even more damaging because, man, I was burning. I had a certainty about what I was doing that looking back on it was just nuts. Some of my work was incomprehensible. Some of it was really good.
So that's where an editor helps filter. Here's a genius column versus, hey, let's go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, some of them were, but I wasn't, some of them were really good and some of them were really bad. But the problem was I thought they were all really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I look at some of them and I go, what the hell was I writing? But others, because it gave you, there were no filters. And there was a certain recklessness. Now, sometimes they came out kind of mean spirited,
Mhm.
but looking back at some of that work, it schmecked, which really, which made me wonder how many times people have written in an altered
Mhm.
consciousness
Mhm.
and produced great work.
Yeah. I mean, you use the word grandiosity, or are there two sides of a coin to say? I'll reflect on this as a writer or somebody who
Sure,
speaks and shares ideas. Is there
sure.
a certain level of that required? Say, I've got ideas that I have to share with people, and they need to read them. That I guess maybe at some point then goes a little bit too far to become a
Yeah, no,
detriment.
that's it. The other night I was at Casablanca. They had a screening on the big screen. Now Casablanca has only one regrettable element, and that's the treatment of the only African American character in the movie, Sam,
Mhm.
which is dreadful. But the rest of the movie is absolutely perfect. And as I left the movie, I wanted to converse with talk to other people about how great this movie was. So I stood at the door, I held the door open, and I said to people as they went by, "Wasn't that a great movie?" And they said, "Yeah, it was great." And the next person came by, it was great. When I think something is great, I have a compulsion to share it. When I
Mhm.
have a great story, I have to share it. It's not like it's a, and my family has always known that. When I was a little kid, I was 5 years old. My sister got an umbrella for her birthday, and
Mhm.
we happened to be in the car driving by as she was walking down the street, and I rolled down the window and said, "It's an umbrella! It's an umbrella!" It's still code in my family for the fact that I can't stop myself.
Right.
So that
Right.
was always there, but it was the absolute thinking that whatever I
Mhm.
did was, I just couldn't understand why no one else got it. I just thought that I was the only person,
Mm.
seemingly the
Mhm.
only person that had this absolute clarity of what I was doing. And of course, and I think anyone can do this, when you have no restraint, you're just going to keep on
Mhm.
drifting
Mhm.
out until your actions are unfathomable to other people.
Mhm.
And that's where I was.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. The you didn't get fired. That you got this travel ban.
Yeah.
Was some of that a matter of the organization maybe showing you some grace of realizing, or you discovering and them discovering that you were battling bipolar disorder, and let's give Mike a second chance, but kind of keep him on a, if you will, a tighter leash.
No, it wasn't like that at all. The guy that I was involved with left the paper. I was new at the paper, and there had been some tumultuous times just before that. The guy who hired me got fired, and so maybe they realized that I needed help, and they really hadn't
Mhm.
made it available to me. But even then, 20 years ago, um, there wasn't a recognition at all on their part, nor could I have expected one because no one really knew what was going on. And that kind of goes to the nature of depression, because the average time it takes for someone to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder is about 10 years. You don't
Mhm.
go to the doctor when you feel great. You go to the doctor when you feel poorly. And so as a result, the doctor gives you antidepressants. And I make the analogy of a balloon, right? Instead of sort of letting a little air out of the balloon, they fill the balloon up with air. That's what the medication does. And so all of a sudden the balloon just flies around and then hits the ground empty.
Yeah.
It's natural to think that you need to pump up the balloon when the person
Mhm.
presents themselves in a depressed state, but in fact, that's the worst thing that can happen. You have to have a very a course of treatment that really addresses that bipolar illness. If not, then you just it's things spiral, and that's
Yeah.
what happened with me.
Yeah, and you wrote in your book, yeah, it wasn't even so much a mistake, but maybe it was just at the frontier of medical knowledge of what we didn't know then versus what we know now. Like maybe
Oh,
now it would be a mistake, or how do you prevent the mistake? Might be a question for the clinicians out there. How do you prevent that mistake based on today's knowledge? I wonder, have they gotten better at diagnosing bipolar, or once that diagnosis is known? maybe they're more consistent in what to prescribe or what not to prescribe.
Well, the only thing is that what I was giving them to diagnose me was only the sad part,
Sure.
right? So very difficult for someone to intuit that other part, because you only present when you're sad. And so very, very difficult. Although, so when I was finally diagnosed correctly, I came back to my wife and I was quite flummoxed, because no one who's bipolar thinks they're bipolar until someone says, dude, you're bipolar. And then
because they're seeing both the ups and the downs, the
that's
manic
right,
or the depression. Yeah.
So I came back to my wife and I said, they said I'm bipolar. And she went, no, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. One other question, before moving on to some other topics,
Sure.
when this happened, one thing I think, is interesting to think through, is showing some grace to yourself when a mistake happens. Like, in this situation here, you can't undo a slap. Curious, kind of your thoughts in terms of like, I don't know if you will, forgiving yourself or kind of processing that and moving on.
Well, that's really such a great question, because when we think about our favorite mistake, we naturally think of it's my favorite mistake, right? So we naturally think about our ramifications. But what's hard to do is to think about the ramifications about the other person on the other end of that, because you've done that person damage, and you can do your best when you recover to try to fix that. But really, that person is under no obligation to accept the fact that you're sorry. And so the challenge, and I think that's such an astute question, the challenge is then to reach a peace with that, because you can't make amends. The great thing about one of the things about Catholicism is that you say 3 Hail Marys and you're square, right?
Yeah.
You confess to the priest, you see your 3 Hail Marys, and we're good. Absolution is a great thing to grant, but in its absence, when you don't receive absolution, that sets up another dynamic of how do you give yourself absolution. I'm not sure we can absolve ourselves completely. And I think that's a good thing, because that little bit of regret should exist, because that of course is your alarm bell for when you're acting out again. But my regret isn't necessarily what I did, although I regret it. My regret is that I can't make it right. And I altered the course of somebody else's life. That's a little tougher to live with.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you said that person that you slapped left the paper. Did you ever cross paths again?
Just, on the periphery, but
yeah,
completely within his rights. He had no interest in engaging me.
Sure.
And I get it. I haven't really talked about this on a podcast much, just because I wouldn't want to bring that person back into my story.
Sure.
I think podcasts are there's so many good ones that hopefully I actually don't want this to reach him, because I don't want to drag him in. But I think it's instructive. Sure. I think the greater good is that it's instructive for people to know that you can kind of come back from these incidents.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing the story and the reflection and some glimpse into a path for being healthier and being in a better place. So it's certainly good to hear that part of the story as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's I still have a wide range of emotions, but I'm just the guy next door now. Yeah. But oh man, I burn bright. And just to put a close on it, a lot of people don't want to be medicated, because imagine a life where you're sure about everything, where everything you do in your own mind is justified. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Where your mind is racing to conclusions, many of them really great conclusions, where you're every step you take, you're walking like a giant. That's a very seductive thing. Sure. And so a lot of people, I think, don't want to go back and take the shrinking pill and go back to being like everybody else. Right. So it's a very enticing prospect, and a lot of people don't want to go back until they really mess it up. Yeah. And then they have to have a real accounting. And
Sure.
and so it's a very powerful allure.
Hmm. Well, again, thank you for, gosh, that's well said, and thank you for the reflections and the story.
Oh,
Like one other question I want to ask you before talking about books and publishing. This was something you talked about in your book, and maybe thinking as a writer or thinking about words and language, and as you being a cancer survivor. Why do you say it's a mistake to use the phrase battle with cancer? I thought that was an interesting point.
thank you for asking that. That's so great. Cancer, like many things, is mythologized as a battle. And
Mhm.
I've had cancer. I don't recommend it. But
Right.
but if it's a battle, then when you die, you lose,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we say he lost his battle to cancer. We use the
Right.
verb lose.
Right.
You didn't
Right.
lose your. Norm
Mhm.
Macdonald said it best. I had the cancer. The cancer killed me. That's a draw. The cancer died too.
Yeah. Yeah. Rest in peace, Norm. Yeah.
Yeah, what a
Yeah.
brilliant observation.
Yeah.
Because what we're saying is that people that didn't survive died, and
Mhm.
we all die. That was just their time. People say you beat cancer. I didn't beat cancer. I took the measures that didn't allow it to live, and anyone would take those measures. There wasn't any great courage in beating cancer any more than there was any great weakness in dying and quote quote losing to it. We
Yeah.
have to make that analogy, and I just don't understand why. I see it all the time. I think it's a discredit to the people who pass. It was their time.
Mhm.
That's it.
Yeah. It's. I mean, it's interesting to think about. It's, I think, well intended. Of, like, they good for
They
them.
fought the good
They were
fight.
brave. They fought the good fight. But then, like you said, yeah, losing a battle, it almost implies of they didn't fight hard enough. I mean, that's
Really.
insulting then, right?
That's
Yeah.
so I think I couldn't agree. I wish I'd worded it that well. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. But that's an interesting point to think and reflect about there. So um I want to ask about your experience with writing and publishing and helping people write. You before we talk maybe about possible book writing mistakes.
Sure.
You state pretty strongly. I jotted this down here of answering this question: why should people write a business book? And you say pretty directly, everyone should. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thanks. It's I just think it's a fantastic vehicle. Maybe not for the reason that you think it is. Obviously, in a sort of when we're all our own marketing companies, to have a book, listen, to write a book generates more, not necessarily warranted esteem than anything else I can imagine, except for being a scratch golfer. I mean, I've been dining out on this for years and years and years about how when you write a book, people think you're really, really smart. People will tell me that that just a book is like a checkup. When someone sees that you've written a book, they haven't even read the book. They go, "Oh, you've written a book. Well, you must be an authority then." So just having done that, there's so many great things about writing a book. It's sort of the central wheel for your media. You can make money doing it, which is great. If you want a speaking career, it's almost essential to have a book.
Yeah.
It's a if you don't have a book, I think they would look at you really askance.
Mhm.
So that's really really important. Um, and the really great thing, if you write a great book, is that you can find that story you have to tell every day for the rest of your life. I call it the proposition, and it's like the 4-hour work week. It's a great idea that sort of when you walk by the bookstore, it sort of twists your head around. You got to see. It's based really on your own experiences, so everyone's proposition is different. But it's a piece of information of wisdom that has great value and utility for the person that you're helping. So whenever the business is, if you find that great piece of information that can really help them, and if I can give you an example.
Yeah.
So let's say that you help people plan their estates, and you've seen people come in time after time after time, and all they care about is denying the government their inheritance tax. They'll have anyone else implement the will. They'll give people their property. All they care about is the fact that the government doesn't get their money. And the result of that is great destruction. in families, because they don't understand why other people were chosen to administer the will. They don't understand why someone got a better inheritance. The money always comes if there's a cottage or a property that people have emotional value to. It's just a schmozzle, and it does so much damage. But the truth is, less than 1% of inheritance create an inheritance tax. So the things that people are destroying their family about, they're not applicable, right? They're destroying their families for nothing. So if you were someone in this business, that piece of knowledge, which sort of goes against the grain, most people are worried about that very thing. That's a super piece of knowledge. So if you wrote a book that said, don't ruin your life for an inheritance tax that you're not going to pay, right? And you can call it whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
But that's a terrific message. So it takes a long time to sort of dig and find that message. Sometimes it just takes 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes a long time. So I did a book with a friend, Marc Petitpas, called The 50-Year-Old Millennial, which you referenced.
Yeah.
It was 3 hours into our conversation when Marc said, we were talking about millennials. It's really fashionable to dump on millennials. And he said, they're right. Everything they say is right. They deserve what they want.
Yeah.
They deserve to have a transparent management track. They deserve regular feedback. They deserve to have access to the people making the decisions.
I totally agree. The things that are often ascribed to millennials, I think, well, I know other generations that want those same things, but maybe they've gotten beaten down and they don't ask for it anymore.
That's exactly right, Marc. People don't ask for it anymore. And he said, and that's what he said. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, you're like a 50-year-old millennial.
But there it is.
There it is. That was 3 hours into our conversation.
Yeah.
So in Marc's case, we knew he wanted to attack it from a point of servant leadership. That's what he believes in. But we realized that in fact, his model for servant leadership was perfectly suited to attracting and retaining millennial talent who are now in the prime years of their creativity and productivity.
Yeah.
So we didn't know the book until that moment. And then the rest of it was detail.
Wow.
So yeah, there's that exploration that's so important to find that one thing, that one hook. And then after that, it's just fun.
Yeah. Well, you're speaking to, I think, the power of partnering up with somebody or with people. We often think of writing as this very solitary, it's in my head, or I've done research and it's my fingers on the keyboard. And I think it goes to show there are many ways to bring a book into existence. If someone says, but Mike, I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
That's not an unsurpassable barrier, right?
No, there's a couple of things. When people say I'm not a writer, well, I wasn't a swimmer until I learned. Right?
Yeah.
Imagine you're a baby and the baby says, gets up and tries walking and falls down. The baby goes, well, I guess that's it for the walking thing.
Right.
We can learn, we can adapt skills. Now, I do think that having someone help you find that story, walk you through, look at your history, and look at the point that brought you to that conclusion. Because the second part of it, once you have that hook, the second part of it, Marc, is to be able to sort of look at my history and be able to show the person what brought you to that point. And so the backstory is great, because if I told you, Marc, I just thought of this 10 seconds ago. If I told you, Marc, it took me 10 years to figure this out, but now I know, you would be more inclined to believe me, the conclusion that came after 10 years in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So showing the reader the journey to that conclusion establishes a credibility for you. That's really essential to the book as well.
Yeah.
And then the third element of the book is just tips, just all sorts of tips. In this case, we talked about earlier, would be tax tips. So it's those three elements. You can write your book, and that's great. But I think if I have an appendectomy, I'd rather have someone help me with it.
Right.
And so
I'm not going to read a book about how to do your own appendectomy.
To have someone look at your life, and because a lot of times the things aren't really pleasant. I did the book, the 40 Ways of the Fox. I turned to Ron. I said, why don't you drink? And he said, because my dad drank and he beat me. And I said, well, why did he beat you? And he said, well, because he was a man who said a lot of things. He said, would have, could have, should have. And I vowed that I would never drink and that I would never utter those words again. Ron, this is Ron Foxcroft, who I'm speaking to, who's that book there, 40 Ways of the Fox.
Hold that back up again. Was that?
Sure.
Okay, I was going to say, actually a hockey referee,
No, he was a
or just,
basketball referee who
oh, it's
invented the Fox
basketball.
40 whistle.
Okay.
Yep. And
Okay.
so that piercing whistle that
Uh-huh.
it's that he would be your favorite mistake because he discovered that he blew the whistle in an Olympic pre-tournament game in Brazil and it didn't work. And he said, if I ever survive this, I'm going to build a better whistle.
Wow.
And he did.
Wow.
That was his favorite mistake. And you're right. Good call.
I may ask for an introduction there.
I would gladly do that.
So that sounds like a good story. But sorry, go ahead.
So Ron doesn't talk about his alcoholic father to people. But if you know Ron, he's always been running both towards and away from his dad. And I didn't discover that until that moment. And so having someone interview you, sometimes you create a truth that you wouldn't otherwise volunteer. And so that's really the power of it, because most people that read that book say, geez, Ron, my dad drank too. I get you. I understand you in a way I couldn't before. So that gives you a credibility and a power.
Yeah.
What we do is we have sort of one service is that I help you find that hook. We talk until it takes an hour, maybe 3 hours. We find that hook, and that's it. I call it find your brand for $1,000.
Yeah.
And we do that. And then we have other services where we can help you lay out the book. You can do it yourself. And then we have another service where you give us 3 or 4 hours. And that's the book.
Yeah. Wow. The thing about credibility boosting, you're right. I end up, friends of mine who are consultants and they do speaking and they want to do more. The conversation almost always comes back to, so are you writing a book?
Yes.
I think there's an interesting mistake that happens sometimes, though, is assuming that the author will also be a good speaker. Like those are almost mutually exclusive skill sets. I wouldn't assume the ability to write or create a book always means that they're a good speaker. Like they may have good things to say that maybe just aren't. They maybe need a speaking coach if they just don't deliver that message well verbally. But those are things, like you said, about swimming or learning to walk. I mean, so I've had a speaking coach. I think I'm reasonably okay at it, but it's a skill. Maybe it's a mistake of somebody not investing enough in becoming a better speaker. I don't know.
Well, of course, as you know, there's 2 elements to speaking. There's a presentation, and then there's the actual message. Mm-hmm. I can't do much for the presentation, but the real benefit of I always say this: the real benefit of a book is I'm giving you the book for free. I'm bringing you to the conclusion. That's why you pay me. Mm-hmm. Athletes, a hockey player will say, "Hey, man, I play for free. You pay me to practice."
That's good.
Or I'm giving you the book for free. The real value is in the conclusion. Mm-hmm. And so, if you wrote the book you meant to write, you wrote the wrong book. The process of writing, I can see you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The process of working with someone and writing the book is that it's you have to go past what you know into what you think and what you remember and what you feel and what you think you know and what you don't know. And so the conclusion, because you're tested, I'm asking you questions, so you're tested. And so the result is you find that story that's really great. You find that hook that's really great. And then you adapt that to your speech. So in terms of someone looking to create craft a message for their speech, I think the process that we do is really useful. But in terms of speaking in front of people, that's where your speaking coach really comes through.
Sure. One other question I want to ask, when we talked previously, you brought up a really interesting idea that it might be a mistake, or it is a mistake, to write with your audience in mind. That seems like a thoughtful thing to do as the writer. Like, I want to think about my audience and what are they going to take away from it and what can they do? And I'm writing with the audience in mind. Tell us more about your view on that.
Well, there's sort of two streams to that. Every word that you write as an author has to be done in consideration of the reader. Every decision you make has to be done for their convenience. they're putting down every single thing they have going in the world, all their cares, all their concerns, to give you their undivided attention. And that's
Right.
a privilege that you have to take really, really seriously. And
Yeah.
that factors into what your book looks like, whether there's sidebars, how easy you make it, how much. I was given a book, it had 42,000 words. It now has 20. It's better.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
can believe it.
every element, powerful verbs, every element has to be done in consideration of the reader. But your message, if it's skewed to please the reader, it's your journey, right? It doesn't have anything to do with them. At the end of the journey, hopefully you have something you can bring to them. But to write a book with the audience in mind is to patronize them.
Okay. Yeah.
You have to come with your conclusion, and your conclusion is so strong that it benefits them. You don't want to write a book that doesn't benefit the people that you want to read it. But if you write a book always with the intention of pleasing who will read it, then you're not doing either one of you any good.
So yeah, thank you. That's a much more subtle, better articulation than what I had jotted down from our previous conversation. So yeah, I didn't mean to misrepresent. It would be a mistake to say Mike is saying don't think about your reader, because that's clearly not what you're saying and not what you mean. But don't go overboard in focusing only on the reader. There's got to be some sense of self in saying, well, here, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Of like, here's what I feel compelled to write, whether anybody else likes it or not. There's some element of that required.
Yeah, because you have to take a contrarian stance. The 4-hour work week is a contrarian stance. 4,000 weeks, the time management for mortals is a contrarian stance. You have to be willing to say to the people who want to buy your book, we're doing this wrong, and this is the best way. But if you're always worried about pleasing your reader, then you're going to end up saying, dude, you're doing everything right. And then how can you help them?
Great point. Great point. Mike, I want to ask a question or two about publishing. And again, our guest is Mike Ulmer. His website is getcatapulted.com to go learn more about him. As let's say somebody is thinking of writing a book and they're trying to figure out how to do it. Nowadays, there are many avenues open. It's not the old days of having to find a publisher.
Yeah.
And going through that proposal or having a agent and shopping it around. There are many approaches to self-publishing. And I don't even like the term self-publishing. It's more of like, self-directed publishing with great professionals, any more than I would self-operate. Back to your point about that. Self-publishing can be just as professional as a traditional publisher. But that said, there are mistakes sometimes that people make of falling into a partnership with somebody who's more predatory than just not more predatory, is predatory. How does somebody look out for that and make sure they're partnering with somebody who, let's say, doesn't become an unnecessary middleman in some of the selling of the book?
Well, I think there's two things to worry about. There are people who will say they're helping you write your book, but they'll charge you by the month. And writing a book is hard. I put mine off all the time. You're going to have some periods where you're just not up to it. And so the meter is still running. So what they want is for you to be, stalled, because then they can charge you more and more and more. So there's writing services that are sort of where their profit motive is not to have you finish the book. There's writing services where they won't tell you the hard truths, and that you're not bringing anything to the table, that you're not being vulnerable enough. It's hard to say to someone who's paying you, you're not giving me enough. That's hard. And so there are people that are just not terribly qualified to do it either. So there's sort of that corner. But the other corner is that people that only want to talk about the marketing. Just the marketing, and specifically people that want to game the algorithm and make you, a bestseller. When I see the word bestseller, I automatically think bullshit. Because because it's really easy to be. There is no standard for bestseller.
Right.
If you're in the category of left-handed knitting books with red thread, and you've sold 3, and the only other person who sold 1, you're the best seller in that category. Congratulations.
Right. Or maybe the bestseller of that category of books at Amazon.Estonia or something, right?
Excellent. Good call.
Well, then I'm
Amazon.
an international
That's
bestseller.
it. You're big. So you get a screen capture and all of a sudden you're the bestseller. There is no number for bestsellers. Right. Anyone who tells you they can make you a bestseller without knowing your book is lying to you. Well, they're not lying to you. They can actually do it, but they're selling you something that's completely invalid. I had someone tell me I could, write a book in a day and I can make that a bestseller. Really?
Yeah.
A day? It doesn't work that way.
Right. And, in your bio, there's a difference between saying best-selling as a broad category. Like I have friends in the distilling business industry. There are words like craft. Craft whiskey has no legal definition. It's just a word.
Natural.
And bestseller, unless someone can really be specific. So in your bio, you give the sales number. And it's the best-selling alphabet book now in Canadian publishing history. So I'm believing you. I'm taking that at face value. But that's a specific enough claim. I mean, it's the old joke of like, well, if the lie is really specific, it becomes more believable. But no, I mean, but you've got some data and credibility to this this statement. Or it gets to the point of like, well, if every book is a bestseller, then none of them are.
Yeah, that's it. I see it all the time. Best-selling author. Oh man, I would advise anyone who has paid for this to take it down, man. And here's the thing. Here's the problem with it. If you concentrate on the marketing of the book exclusively, then the book won't be a good book.
Right.
Write a good book. That's it. Just write a good book. The rest of it will take care of itself. You'll get great reviews. You'll get word of mouth. One person saying to another, I love this book is far more important than any crazy bought bestseller element. Yeah. Write a great book and everything else will take care of itself. But write with vulnerability and offer the reader something tangible and have a great backstory and lots of advice.
That's great advice to end this on. Mike, thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable in telling your story of your favorite mistake. And the reflections and moving forward from that. So I really do appreciate that. And, if you want to write a great book, Mike is somebody who can help you with that. You can learn more about his services at getcatapulted.com. Again, his most recent book, which I've started reading and I've purchased, and I'm going to continue reading.
God bless you, my son.
As I'm going through a journey, writing a book about lessons learned from this podcast here. His book is Show and Tell Writing, a great short business book about how to write a great short business book. And maybe someday you can write a book about how to write a book to help people write a book.
That's right. It's very meta, very meta.
Because there are a lot of books out there about how to write a book. There are podcasts about how to do a podcast. There's something certainly helpful and useful there from what I've seen. So,
are there any marketers that don't market to other people learning how to market? Like the business of marketers showing non-marketers how to market seems to be marketing.
Sure, and I'm sure that does exist, but there's bring it back to we'd done all the sports talk. There was somebody who lived down the street from me. Oh my gosh, he was he wasn't the player, but he ran a hitting academy and baseball academy that was affiliated, and it was named at Bernie Carbo.
Oh, Bernie hit the big home run for the Red Sox.
Yes.
Yeah, Bernie Carbo.
It was, and so I think the guy who lived down the street, he was the father of a classmate. I think he had played minor league baseball, but I think there's something to be said for it. Like I think he was smart to call it the Bernie Carbo School because you want to learn from somebody, who'd been there, done that at the highest levels. That may or may not be true with a book coach. So that's maybe something to look out for or think about as well.
Yeah, it's true. Are there a lot of book coaches out there, Mark? Because I haven't read it. There are. Right?
Yeah. I think there are. There are a lot of coaches these days for, like as you said, people offering services to help. I've used book coaches and I've used people there. There's an important role to play.
Yeah.
But I think as with anything, their past accomplishments and your relationship with them, your fit and connection with them matter a lot, because I'm sure Bernie Carbo wasn't the right hitting coach for every baseball player.
No, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I've done some research on that, and I've found some, but I'm glad you told me that. I didn't know there was that kind of a volume of them out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, food for thought. So maybe there's a book to be written about how to choose the book coach that's right for you.
How to choose a book coach who shows you how to write the book about how to write the book.
We'll keep working on that. Mike, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you earlier for the baseball talk, and that would have been fun to record for a different audience, and maybe we can do that again someday.
People from Sarnia and from what's your hometown in Michigan?
Livonia, Michigan.
Livonia, of course, Livonia, Michigan. Yes,
yeah, not too far across from the crossing into Windsor, Ontario. But again, Mike Ulmer has been our guest today. It's been great fun. I think a really meaningful episode. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. I sure appreciate it, Mark.